Going to. All right, thank you so much. Take it away, April.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. So I am April Clark. I am the program leader with Integrated Community Solutions. I will be running through the application process today as a whole. So we'll go through eligibility, the application itself, as well as next steps in the process once the application is submitted. I'm just gonna pull up the presentation here. And I do apologize in advance. I have a cold, as luck would have it, so I apologize for the nasally sounding presentation you're about to get. But all right, so ICS is actually a nonprofit organization, and we are contracted by both the Brown County Housing Authority and the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority, WHEDA. So this presentation will primarily focus on the Brown County Housing Authority program, also known as BCHA. But I did want to mention that we do also administer rental assistance for 25 counties through the WHEDA program as well. And we also have our Ladder of Hope Foundation that we raise funds for, which is more discretionary money that we can kind of use as more community involvement type things. One of the things that we use that funding for is our Feeding Our Families food pantry. So we do have a food pantry at our office here in Green Bay where anyone can walk in and we can hand out some basic food items in a bag as well. So just know that that's a resource for your clients as well. How does someone qualify for rental assistance? They must be at or below the income limit for their household size, which is noted at the bottom of the screen. The income limits are updated annually, typically around April of every year. So we don't have the updated income limits for 2024 yet. We are still operating under the 2023 income limits. HUD has a requirement that we need to deny program participation for anyone who has had a misdemeanor in the past 3 years or a felony in the last 5 years, if it is drug related or violent. Other types of charges, if they're not drug related or violent, then they typically won't result in denial. And I will mention that in the past, we also had a denial policy for city ordinance violations or forfeitures, like if there was a possession of paraphernalia citation or something like that, that would have been grounds for termination or denial. And now we have removed the city ordinance violation piece. So it's only misdemeanors or felonies that we're looking at. The applicant cannot be a registered sex offender for life. Applicants who have a limited term, like if they have a 15-year term on the list, they are eligible to apply and they're eligible at any time. They don't need to wait until the term limit is up. If there is a term indicated on the website, they're eligible. If it says that they are a lifetime registrant, they are not eligible. The applicants cannot have been evicted from a rental unit that was assisted by federal rental assistance in the last 3 years. So if they were previously a program participant, they were receiving rental assistance and they were evicted while being a program participant, then they would be ineligible to apply for 3 years. If they had an eviction that was not related to rental assistance or they were not on the program at the time, that does not count and they are still eligible to apply. Applicants must also not owe any debts to any housing authority in the US. Any past participation that would have resulted in a debt being owed back to the housing authority must be paid in full before they can reapply for assistance. On our application, there is a waiting list selection page, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. But the waiting list selection page references that we have 2 different types of vouchers. So the largest program that we have and the largest or most common voucher type that you hear about is going to be the housing choice voucher. This is a tenant-based voucher and it travels with the client. And the other type of voucher is a project-based voucher. And the project-based voucher stays connected to the unit. So in the housing choice voucher process, we have a waiting list, they apply. There are various preferences for applicants depending on kind of what they qualify for. And then within those preferences, the application is ordered by date and time that the application was received. For the project-based voucher, there is a contract with the Brown County Housing Authority and any of the project-based landlords that identify which units will be earmarked for project-based rental assistance. When one of those units is coming available, the landlord is sent a list of applicants that have recently applied, and then they reach out to that applicant directly. So the list that they receive is, there are no preferences that we establish for that waiting list. So they receive the waiting list that is ordered by the bedroom size that they're eligible for, and then just by date and time that the application was received. With the housing choice voucher, they need to search for a unit once they have obtained the voucher. With the project-based voucher, they are being contacted when a unit becomes available. So it kind of eliminates that searching process. And for applicants who may have some higher barriers with locating a rental unit and a landlord who is willing to rent to them, sometimes the project-based voucher can be a great option because the landlords that they're working with are kind of more familiar with the program and will hopefully be a little more willing to take a chance. With the housing choice voucher, we use the voucher payment standard for the payment limit of what we can pay toward. And the project-based voucher uses what's called the fair market rent, and we used 110% of the fair market rent. With housing choice voucher, the family can be approved for a larger unit than what their voucher size is if the housing expenses are still within the payment limit. However, with project-based voucher, they can only be in the unit size that they qualify for. So they cannot occupy a larger unit than what they qualify for. If their household circumstances change once they are residing in a unit and their voucher changes from a 3-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, they do need to move to a 2-bedroom unit so that that 3-bedroom is opened up for a 3-bedroom or a family that needs a 3-bedroom unit. For the housing choice voucher program, it cannot transfer to project-based. So in order to receive a project-based voucher, the applicant needs to come to the top of the waiting list and receive the voucher that way. With the project-based voucher, there is a way to transition from project-based to HCV if the tenant completes the full 12 months, the first initial term of the lease in the project-based unit. If they're still in good standing with the landlord and in good standing with our program, they can technically apply for a housing choice voucher and then be issued one right away, as long as we have the ability to issue vouchers. Looking at the application itself, the instructions for completing the application as a whole are listed on the cover sheet. So the cover sheet explains which program is being applied for. It's important to note that because we do have a couple different kinds of applications because we have the WIDA program as well. So it's important when applicants are submitting an application that they're using the correct application. The cover sheet will note the current income limits. It notes what is needed to complete the application as far as having supporting documents, and that all signatures must be present in order to have a complete and full application that places someone on the waiting list. The application form asks about name, mailing address. Mailing address is required. We do have some applicants who just list homeless as a mailing address, and we are not able to contact them through that. So we're not able to proceed with the voucher. So it's very important that they do use a mailing address, whether that's a case manager, a PO box, a general delivery, a friend or family member who's going to be reliable in getting their mail to them. We just need to be able to contact them by mail somehow. We do also need legal or residential address listed if they're not providing verification of homelessness. This is because if they are indicating that they are a Brown County resident and qualify for any of the preferences that we'll be going over, we need to verify what their Brown County address is, and then they'll need to provide supporting documentation of that as well. So both mailing address and legal address should be filled in. And then it also asks about former names, email address, it asks about head of household information, and then the rest of the family members. The next page asks about family income and assets. Estimates are okay at this point. The next section, part 4, asks about eligibility and preferences. So this is where applicants need to read through and see if any of these qualify, or if they would qualify for any of these faster waiting lists. And if they do believe they qualify, they need to select that on here so that we know we need to be looking for that documentation from them. The final section of this form is part 5. It requires that households sign at the bottom of the application. This is a required part. It just notes that admission to the program may be contingent upon verification of citizenship or eligible immigration status. I will note that households just need to have at least one eligible household member. So we are able to prorate rental assistance. So if we have, as HUD calls it, mixed family, so if there is mixed eligibility, if, for example, 2 household members are eligible citizens or eligible non-citizens, and, for example, 2 are not, then we would be able to prorate that assistance. We would calculate whatever their rental assistance portion would be. And then if 50% are eligible, we would issue 50% of the rental assistance that they would have received. And then the signature also just has the applicant certify that the information provided is complete and true, and acknowledge the penalties for committing program fraud on the application. The waiting list selection form explains the voucher types that are available. So as I mentioned, we have the housing choice voucher and project-based. There is just one box for the housing choice voucher program. And then because project-based voucher, the project-based voucher program has various landlords that we work with, the applicant needs to select which project-based units they are interested in. And there is a signature section on the second side as well. There is a release of information form that we need completed and signed by all adults over 18, or all household members over 18. It allows us to verify a variety of information if needed, and also allows us to do the background check as they're being selected from the waiting list. The supplement to the application for federally assisted housing, which we internally generally just call the alternative contact form, is another form of release of information. We suggest that if you as a case manager are planning to be reaching out and looking for updates and whatnot, we encourage you to have the applicant fill out your information on here so we can release information to you. And that will have that documentation on file then. If you have a different release of information form that's already been completed, you can go ahead and send that over to us, and that will work. But if you don't have something already filled out, this form will help. The debts owed form, or really just a document that they need to sign, explains that public housing agencies report program terminations and participant debts to HUD. And as a public housing agency, when we are selecting from the waiting list and approving applicants, we have to check for any outstanding debt that they might have to a prior housing authority that they might have worked with. And again, those debts do need to be paid in full before they're eligible to apply. And the form or this document here needs to be signed by the head of household on the second side. So I mentioned that the Housing Choice Voucher waiting list has something called preferences. And it just kind of talks about how we have ordered the waiting list, or the Brown County Housing Authority has ordered the waiting list. Project-based vouchers do not have those preferences as designated by ICS or the Brown County Housing Authority, but the Housing Choice Voucher Program does. If someone is indicating that they qualify for one of these preferences, they do need to submit documentation to support that. And the way that these preference lists work is that each list must be completely depleted before we move on to the next. So this table shows the setup of kind of the order that we pull in. So those who are involuntarily displaced, so most often we see this for households who have had a fire. Most times they're working with the Red Cross, and then we get verification from the Red Cross that they have been involuntarily displaced by fire. And these applicants do not even get entered on the waiting list. They are just selected right away, sent the next set of paperwork, and we begin that process right away. The next category is permanent supportive housing and Brown County FUP youth. These are specific programs that have been established with certain agencies. So these are referral based, and the wait time is 0 to 1 month. The list that we pull from most frequently is this next one, the list for those who are elderly, disabled, homeless, or veterans. So everyone qualifying for this list needs to be a Brown County resident or working in Brown County. The next list is for the households that don't qualify for any of the above, but have minors in the household. The next list is for a Brown County residents who didn't qualify for any of the above. And then the final preference is any non-Brown County residents. So we deplete each list completely before we move on to the next. So if we are selecting the applicants from the minors waiting list, we have completely depleted the elderly, disabled, veteran, and homeless waiting list. So that's why the wait time for those the further lists takes quite a while, because we have to deplete the list. So which documents are needed to support the application that is submitted? So in general, verification of date of birth and social security number is required for all household members. If someone provides verification of homelessness, they're only required for the adult household members. That being said, eventually we will need those documents for the children. So if they don't have them now, they should start working on obtaining them. But for the purpose of the application, we just need the adult household members. If the applicant is claiming residency in Brown County, they also need to provide proof of residency or verification of homelessness. And the verification of homelessness should certify that they are a Brown County resident and either homeless or at risk of experiencing homelessness. And then finally, they should also provide any supporting documentation for the preferences that they claim. For those preferences, if they are displaced due to natural disaster or government action, typically that will be a letter from the Red Cross or government agency or service agency that's working with city officials. If someone is homeless, we're looking for a certification from a local service agency, and it needs to clearly state that the applicant is a Brown County resident and is homeless or at risk of homelessness. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a homeless shelter. It can be someone who is going to have the knowledge to make that certification or make that that verification document. So it could be a social worker through the school. It could be I'm just trying to think, just someone who's working with them in the social service field. For veteran status, we will be looking for a copy of the DD 214 to verify age, that someone qualifies for the elderly waiting list. Generally, we don't ask them to provide anything additional because they're already verifying date of birth. But if we needed to, we would use that birth certificate. To verify disability, we look for the Social Security Disability or SSI Benefit Award Letter. If someone is not yet receiving Social Security or they've been denied or whatever the case may be, we do have an alternative form that can be completed, or a medical professional can provide a written statement relating to the HUD definition of disability. But if you ever need a copy of that form, we have them available through customer service. Otherwise, I can send them to you as well. It's just a form. It's like 4 questions, yes or no, for a medical professional to complete, that we can use in place of the Social Security award letter to verify disability. And then finally, households with children, we would then be looking for a copy of the birth certificate, eventually to show that there are children in the household. After a complete application is received, so all of the signatures were there, all of the supporting documents were there. Once that complete application is received, the applicant is placed on all the waiting lists that they selected and qualified for. All programs administered by our agency currently have a waiting list. These HUD programs that we are working with are not designed to be emergency rental assistance. We did, through COVID, have the emergency housing voucher program that has since sunset. But so our general programs are not designed to be emergency assistance. We try to expedite that process as much as possible, but there is quite a few steps in the process to get to releasing the payments. Once the applicant has been placed on the waiting list, they'll be mailed a letter confirming that the application has been received and what the anticipated wait time is. The anticipated wait time is subject to change depending on how many applications we receive for different waiting lists, depending on how many we are able to select from a waiting list each month. So there's a variety of factors that affect that. So when we send the letter, we say, this is what the expected wait time is at this time. If someone begins to search for a rental unit, it's important to keep the voucher payment standards in mind so they kind of know what price range to be looking in, to hopefully be sure that it will qualify once the rental assistance comes through. So the voucher payment standard looks at the gross housing expenses, which means we're looking at the contract rent plus any utilities that the tenant will be responsible for as well. So every year, the Brown County Housing Authority does the market research for the utilities, finds the averages for all the different types. We ask the landlord which utilities the tenant will be responsible for. And from there, we come up with an estimate for what the tenant will be paying in utilities. And we assume that they'll be paying that plus some of the contract rent in most cases, and that will roughly be about 30% of their monthly income. Our portion of rent covers the difference up to that voucher payment standard. So when we are looking at the limit of what we can pay toward, we're looking at contract rent plus those tenant responsible utilities. If it's a 1-bedroom unit, we're looking at the limit to be $1,005. 2-bedroom is $1,260. 3-bedroom is $1,675. And 4-bedroom is $1,690. The voucher payment standard, many clients have kind of a misunderstanding of what the voucher payment standard itself is. A lot of our clients, before we have the conversation with them, think that the voucher payment standard is the amount that they actually get toward their rent or that we will be paying for them. But the voucher payment standard is not an amount of assistance, but rather a limit of what we can pay toward. I'm just taking a look at the chat here. Let's see, if the client is not a Brown County resident but does have a disability, do they not need to provide proof? If a client is not a Brown County resident, they would not qualify for the disabled waiting list because it is specifically for Brown County residents who are disabled. They would not need to provide proof of that because they wouldn't need that to document their preference. For schools, can we use the school address to be able to deliver these documents to families if they are homeless and don't have an active mailing address? Yep. Yep. So as long as the family is able to get that mail in a timely manner, that is perfectly fine. Most of our letters have a deadline of about 2 weeks from the date that it's mailed. If you think that they'll need more time, you can always reach out to us. But it's important that they get their mail in a timely fashion. All right, so after the application is submitted, the mailing address must be kept up to date. So many times we have clients submit an application, they move, sometimes they update their address with the post office, and then we can still, like, the post office will return the mail to us, and then we'll update the mailing address and resend it and give it another shot. If they do not update their mailing address with us, and it's not updated with the post office, or it was and it didn't work for us for some reason, and they're no longer at that one, the application is closed. So it's very important that the mailing address, that they keep a valid mailing address on file and that it's updated as soon as they move. Phone numbers must also be up to date. And changes to household composition must also be reported as they happen, primarily because with the project-based voucher program, household composition determines the number of bedrooms that they're eligible for. So if their household composition changes, that may change which waiting list that they're on and what their placement on the waiting list is. So it's super important to keep us in the loop with all of those changes. And all of those changes need to be submitted in writing. So it can be a document that's mailed in, dropped off, faxed, emailed, whatever the case is, it just needs to be in writing. Excuse me. So we can keep a copy of that in the file. We cannot accept phone call updates or voicemail updates. All right, so to kind of finalize and talk about what that process looks like then after the application has been submitted and they're on the waiting list. I mentioned there are a number of steps, so that's where this comes in. So after the application is complete, submitted, they're on the waiting list, they are then selected from the waiting list. We complete the background check as someone is coming off of the waiting list. So we don't look for those background check items at the time of application. We do look for the debt at the time of application, but we do the background check at the time that they're being selected from the waiting list. We typically select from the waiting list on or around the 6th of every month. And then we send for the background check. That's an internal process that we do. And then once we have verified that the applicant is eligible based on the background check, then we send out the tenant information form as the next step in the process. This will generally give the client 2 weeks to complete and return, unless there's some holidays in there. We might grant some additional time on that letter. So we send that out on or around the 20th of every month. Once we receive that TIF back, the applicant is assigned to a housing specialist. The housing specialist is then given that paperwork, they review it, they mail a letter with the date and time of the client's initial appointment. Oftentimes that appointment is 2 to 3 weeks after the TIF is received. Sometimes it can be a little bit longer than that, depending on how kind of far we get behind. If we're selecting a lot of applicants from the waiting list, it gets kind of hard to squeeze everyone in on the schedule. So that's another reason why we don't just pull a ton of people from the waiting list at a time, is because we have to meet with everyone. So that appointment generally takes place 2 to 3 weeks after the TIF is returned. The initial appointment will be with the head of household and any adult family members that want to come or are that it makes sense to come, or if there are any like guardians or case managers that want to come with, that's perfect too. Anyone who can kind of help hear about the process, the searching process and the policies, we're more the merrier. Come on along. After the initial appointment, we do a large group briefing. It's just kind of an orientation to the program. The voucher officially becomes active at this meeting. So once the client attends the orientation, we verify everyone was there, and then that voucher has the initial start date of the briefing date. The client must then start searching for a rental unit, and when they find a unit, they'll need to submit the request for tenancy approval, also called the RTA, and that needs to be submitted by the expiration date on the voucher. So we start with 60 days on the voucher, and if they request it, the client can have up to 2 30-day extensions. Generally, they do need to be actively searching for a unit. So in order to receive the extensions, there is a short survey of sorts that they fill out, asking about like how many places have you applied for, or what sort of barriers are you running into, so that we can kind of evaluate like have they been utilizing the time that they've had so far on the voucher? And then also, if they are running into barriers, are there things that we can do or resources we can connect them with to help alleviate some of those barriers? Once we receive the request for tenancy approval, the unit will be reviewed for reasonable rent. We make sure it's not that the landlord isn't trying to charge a way higher rent than what's reasonable, because it will be an assisted unit. And then we also verify family affordability for the unit and that it's within the payment standards. Once we verify that, the inspection is scheduled. Generally, we try to get to the unit, if it's a new unit, we try to get there within a couple days, if possible. Sometimes it's closer to a week and a half. But we also try to reach out to the landlord and kind of verify that the unit will actually be ready for inspection by the time we get there too. After the inspection passes, we request the lease and a HAP contract with the landlord. Once we receive that back, then we release our payments and we can start issuing those payments to the landlord. A letter is mailed to both the client and the landlord verifying the tenant portion of rent, the housing assistance portion that will be sent, and the effective date. After all of that is complete, the initial process or the new admission is done. Beyond that, we do check in once a year or twice a year, I guess. So we check in annually for both an annual income and asset review and then also an annual inspection. So the annual inspection is independent from the annual income and asset review. So just because someone receives their annual review paperwork doesn't mean necessarily that the inspection is going to be happening right away. We do the inspection, generally we aim for every 11 months to hopefully not go beyond the, I think we need to get there within 12 months. So we schedule at 11 months to give a little bit of a grace period if necessary. All right. Looking at the group chat, do we have Spanish-speaking case managers at our location that can assist an individual to fill out the application? We do not have any case managers who speak Spanish, but we do work with international translators very frequently. So we can either work with an interpreter by phone or in the office. And we will get through the meeting that way. You're welcome. All right. Any other questions? You can feel free to pop in the chat. Otherwise, my email is on the screen. You can send me any questions that you have that way. Our website is also a great resource. Our applicants tab has all of the applications. It explains the process. The participants tab as well. If you have any current participants who are on the program and not necessarily applying, the common forms are on there as well. So like income change forms, household changes, policies, documents, things like that. And then the FAQ page, if you scroll way to the bottom of the website, it's linked at the bottom, FAQ. It just answers a whole host of general questions about the program. Is the annual inspection supposed to be conducted by that site's landlord? Is that something ICS sets up? So our inspectors go out. So we have inspectors. We have 3 inspectors that actually complete the inspection. And if it is a new unit inspection, so if the tenant is not there yet, then we will generally coordinate that with the landlord. Or if the client is there, like if we know that they're already in place at the unit, or like if it's a new admission but they're already there, they're just going to be receiving assistance where they already live, we will likely coordinate that with the client. Or if it's a like annual inspection, then we coordinate that with the client as well. So it's just in those new unit cases where we reach out to the landlord to have them be there, but some landlords do say that they want to be there for them, just to kind of check in and make sure that their properties are being maintained as well. And so then if there's a repair that needs to be made, the landlord is fully aware of what needs to happen and can have the conversation with the inspector while they're there. That can be helpful at times. Do we pre-inspect units before there's a qualified applicant for it? Generally, no. The only difference with this is the project-based units. So those units that are on a contract with the housing authority, those have a pre-inspection done to get them approved for the contract. But generally for housing choice voucher, no. We need like a client associated with the tenant in order to kind of initiate that inspection. If there are tenant concerns about the condition of their home outside of that inspection window, should they contact ICS with the concerns that the landlord may not be addressing? So yes, but we might not always be able to help. So it totally depends on what the situation is and what the issue that isn't being addressed is. Some of those issues we can definitely enforce with the landlord. Some of those are issues that don't necessarily fall within what's called our housing quality standards, or like the standards defined by HUD. So it falls outside of what we can enforce. In those situations, we generally suggest reaching out to the city, because the city has inspectors that can enforce things with the landlord as well. So it doesn't hurt to bring it to us to see if it's something that we can get involved in, but not every situation will qualify for that. Oh, don't be sorry about all the questions. Keep them coming. Can applications only be turned in person, or is there an online submission space? We don't have a way to submit the actual form, like to do a direct submission through a website, but you can email it to us. I should have included that one on here too. You can email it directly to me and I'll get it to customer service. Otherwise, it's at ics-gb.org. I'll put that in the chat. info@ics-gb.org. That's a helpful place to kind of have all the applications funnel into, so I can check them all at once and send them off to customer service. They can also be faxed. We do also have an administrative fax of 920-498-3738. But if you're sending supporting documents that way, sometimes the fax quality is a little low. So if you do email them, if you can just kind of verify that the PDF being sent over shows the documents clearly, that is super helpful, so that hopefully we can read everything on the documents that we need when we get that application. Any other questions? Obtaining birth certificates is always one of the more difficult verifications for my population. Are there funding options to help cover the cost with vital records? Waiver for cost with proof of homelessness? Unfortunately, we don't have funding to cover that. We do have some different options. So the documents that I listed are generally going to be the most common ones that we see. So for verifying date of birth, definitely for adults, we can use an ID, like a state ID that shows their name and date of birth. And then there are different things too that we have outlined in our administrative plan, that HUD says that if you can't get this, you may be able to use this or this. So in those situations where the family isn't able to obtain certain documents, or they're struggling to afford those documents, feel free to reach out and I can see what documents might be options for them, and we can go from there. What about clients and families who are not citizens? Are you asking about like what sort of documents would need to be submitted with the application? Yes, and if they're eligible at all. So if someone has eligible immigration status, I know eligible is, so generally what we look for is if someone has a social security number. Like if someone has a social security number and is eligible for the program, then we would be looking for documentation. If they are not eligible for the rental assistance, then we wouldn't necessarily need those documents. So for example, like if they don't have, like if it's a household that has some family members who are eligible, some family members who are not eligible, they wouldn't have like the social security cards to submit for the household members that are not eligible. So they would just need to indicate that they don't have those documents, and that's okay because we wouldn't be assisting those household members specifically. We would be assisting the household members that do qualify for the assistance. So we would need supporting documentation for any of the household members that are going to be eligible for the rental assistance, if that clarifies things at all. Are there any other agencies that help with clients that are outside of Brown County with Section 8? Yes, so generally there is a housing authority that administers rental assistance for pretty much every area. It's pretty rare to find an area that does not have some kind of housing authority to administer rental assistance. Not every housing authority has necessarily the Section 8, where it's the tenant-based assistance that travels with them. Some locations have more of what's called the public housing, where the assistance is connected to certain like rental assistance, like or connected to certain apartment complexes. So if you're looking for assistance in a certain area, I generally suggest searching like that city housing authority or that county housing authority, and that should get you in the right direction. Otherwise, if you have questions about a specific area or you're not finding something, you can reach out to us and we can kind of check through the HUD websites and see which housing authorities are in that area. And I will mention too that scroll up here. So ICS is also contracted by WIDA to do 25 counties throughout Wisconsin. So if it's one of the counties that you see listed here, that might be like we do the rental assistance for those areas as well. Can you briefly explain the porting voucher process? If a client has ICS and is housed in Brown County, but is trying to move out of county, what does that process look like? Yes, so if the client is housed in Brown County, so it sounds like you're asking about a current participant, if they're on the program and they are looking to port outside of the county. That really just starts with a move request form. It's the same form that you would request if they're moving within Brown County or outside of the county. It consists of the move request itself that the family fills out, asking about if they're up to date on their rent, and asks about where they would like to move to. So that's where they would indicate if they are interested in porting. The second side of that form is called the tenancy termination form. That will need to be completed with the landlord as well. The landlord will need to sign off on it and verify that they have agreed upon a move out date, and that they are current on their rent and utilities. They can also indicate that they haven't agreed on a move out date, but once things are established and ready to move, that they'll land on one. We're basically just looking to verify that they're in good standing with their landlord right now. Once we have that form, if they're a current participant with us, we just kind of pull information from their last annual review, as long as it was within a reasonable amount of time. If the annual review is going to be due within a couple months, we will still need to complete that paperwork with them. But once we have that finalized, we don't even have a meeting or anything. We just fill out that paperwork. We send it off to the other housing authority, the one that they have indicated that they want to move to. And then the other housing authority will contact the client, and then they will establish a time to meet with them and go through their kind of payment limits and their process and all that good stuff. If someone is an applicant and looking to port out of Brown County right away. So if someone is a Brown County resident, if they're a Brown County resident when they apply for the program, they are eligible to take that voucher and port as soon as they have that voucher. So there is no requirement to remain in Brown County for any length of time if they are a Brown County resident when they apply. So if they're a Brown County resident when they apply, they would go through the initial process, they would do the initial appointment, they would do the orientation, that briefing session. And then after the briefing session is attended and that voucher officially becomes active, at that point, it's eligible to be ported. And then we would do kind of a similar thing where the family has identified where they want to move to. We prepare a packet of paperwork, send that over to the other housing authority. They review it, reach out to the family, and then they pick up the process from there. You're welcome. If someone is not current with their landlord or they won't sign it, would that stop someone already on the program from porting it? So if they are not current with their landlord, like if it truly is a client owed thing, like if there were damages or they're behind on rent or utilities, any move or any port would be denied. So tenants do need to be in good standing with their current landlord in order to receive a move voucher to move anywhere. If the landlord is, we know that, like, we hope that there are all good landlords out there, but we know that every once in a while, there's a conflict between client and landlord, and sometimes they're just not able to get that tenancy termination formed. And in some of those situations, we do need to refer to legal action. So we refer to legal action in those situations, and then they will meet with the client. And if they qualify, they will submit an affidavit to us that we will use in place of the tenancy termination that basically is the client certifying that, as far as I know, I don't owe anything to my landlord, but if I find out I do, I will pay it. I have followed all of their program policies, things like that. So if there truly is some kind of conflict that can't be resolved and it's just not working out that way, we can refer to legal action to get around that. How often do you run the background checks? Only the one time when they apply, or is that part of the annual review? It is part of the annual review. Yep. So program policies say that current program participants cannot be engaged in any violent or drug-related activity. So at the annual review, we do a background check, and if we find any violent or drug-related convictions, it will result in termination at that time, and it would also be an overpayment going from first of the month after the offense date going forward. Because of that overpayment piece, if we do the annual review and we find pending charges that may disqualify someone, we generally try to send a letter saying, hey, just so you know, these are pending. If they go through, this is what's going to happen. So it gives people the option to kind of, if they're pretty sure they're going to be convicted, they can decide to opt out ahead of time. But I will mention too that if you're working with someone as a case manager and they are in process of changing things, because I think a lot of times that's when we are meeting with people, is when they're in a time of transition. And so if there is a criminal charge from the past and they're denied, or if they're about to be terminated, you always have the option to appeal that denial or that termination, and explain why we should basically disregard that, why this charge from the past won't affect future participation, and why like they'll be a successful participant going forward. So any letters of support that can be submitted with those appeals are great. So that's my long-winded answer about the annual background checks. Do you have staff who can help with applications or review paperwork? So generally, our applications, our customer service staff are the ones that enter all of our applications right now. So generally, they're going to be a great resource for what's needed on the application. Annual review paperwork, the housing specialist would be the best resource. That being said, especially for annual review paperwork, we generally tell people, like, fill it out to the best of your ability, send it on in, and we'll review it. And if we have any questions on anything, or if there's anything that was missing, we'll reach out to you and we'll let you know. I understand for the application side of things, it's that the date and time that it's approved matters. So you may not want to wait to send it in and wait and hear if it was complete or not. So those applications, if you do want to have it reviewed as it's being submitted, it's a good idea to just come into the lobby, bring it up to the front desk, and they can check through and make sure that the signatures are all there, that the supporting documents are there, and then they can let you know if anything additional is needed right away. Is the WIDA waiting list different than the Brown County waiting list? Yes. Yes, they are totally independent waiting lists. Even the Brown County WIDA waiting list versus the Brown County Housing Authority waiting list, they are separate.
Thank you so much, April. I really appreciate you doing this program today. This is being recorded, so it will be sent out to the full Brown County Homeless and Housing Coalition, as well as anyone who left their email in the chat. And then if there were specific things that were asked for, April and I will work together to make sure that all of those will be included in the website, or sorry, in the email going out. So thank you everyone for being here today, and I hope you have a really great rest of your day. And thank you so much, April. We really appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you.